Hours passed. The men left with warm handshakes and quiet smiles. Daniel and Sarah stood in the empty bedroom. The candles burnt down to their bases. Silence settled between them. Daniel looked at Sarah, searching her face. "I'm sorry if this was too much," he said softly. Sarah shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "It wasn't too much," she whispered. "It was. Just different. I don't know if I'm ready for this." Daniel pulled her into a hug. "I love you. I never wanted to hurt you." She clung to him, trying to believe it was true. But in that moment, Sarah knew their marriage had changed. The line between fantasy and reality had blurred, and she wasn't sure if they could find their way back. The days after that night were heavy with silence. Sarah and Daniel moved through the house like strangers sharing a space. Daniel was apologetic, but distant. Sarah felt lost, caught between wanting to make him happy and wanting to protect her own heart. One afternoon, Sarah sat in the garden, staring at the roses Daniel had planted years ago. She remembered how those flowers had once been a symbol of their love, blooming bright and wild. Now, they felt like a fragile reminder of what they might be losing. She thought about the men who had come into their bedroom, the fantasy that had felt so distant, now so close and real. She wondered, was love really enough? The days after that unforgettable night felt like walking through fog for Sarah. She woke up each morning in the same bed she had shared with Daniel for years, but it no longer felt like hers. The sheets still smelled faintly of candles and something unfamiliar. The room was too quiet, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Sarah found herself retreating into silence. At work, she put on a mask of calm professionalism, but inside, her thoughts were tangled and restless. At home, she avoided Daniel's eyes. She didn't want to ask the questions that screamed in her mind. And she feared the answers even more. Daniel, for his part, was gentle but distant. He apologized every day, with soft words and long hugs. But he didn't push Sarah to talk about what had happened. He seemed to understand that the night had shifted something between them, but he wasn't sure how to fix it, and Sarah wasn't sure if it was fixable. One chilly evening, Sarah sat in their small living room, wrapped in a blanket, the flickering light of the fireplace casting dancing shadows on the walls. Daniel sat beside her, his hand resting lightly on hers. "I've been thinking," Daniel began quietly, "about what you said about disappearing." Sarah looked at him, her eyes tired but attentive. "I never wanted you to feel that way," he continued. "I thought if we could explore this fantasy together, it would bring us closer. But instead, I think I pushed too hard." She swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded. "Maybe I was chasing something I don't really understand," Daniel admitted. "Something I thought would make me feel more alive." Sarah squeezed his hand. "I love you, Sarah," he said. "I don't want to lose us." That love alone didn't seem enough. Sarah realized she had been telling herself a lie. The lie that everything could go back to the way it was before. That the fantasy was just a small crack in their foundation, easy to fix with love and patience. But the truth was more complicated. The fantasy wasn't just about desire. It was about longing for something they had lost somewhere along the way. It was about Daniel's need to feel seen, desired, and alive in ways that scared him. And Sarah's need to be enough. One afternoon, Sarah decided to speak honestly for the first time since that night. They sat across from each other at their kitchen table, the sunlight streaming through the windows, illuminating the tension between them. "Daniel," she began, voice steady, "I want to understand you, but I also need you to understand me." He nodded. "I'm scared," she said. "Scared that the man I married isn't the same man I'm living with now." Daniel looked down, then back up with tears in his eyes. "I'm scared too," he whispered. "Scared that if I'm honest about what I want, I'll lose you." Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. "We need to find a way to be honest with each other, without hurting the person we love." They started couples therapy soon after. The sessions were raw and emotional. They talked about jealousy, fear, desire, and the deep wounds hidden beneath the surface. They talked about the night with the 4 men, what it had meant, what it hadn't. They talked about what it meant to truly be vulnerable. For Daniel, it was admitting that his fantasy wasn't about replacing Sarah. It was about feeling alive in a way he couldn't explain. For Sarah, it was admitting that she felt invisible in the dream Daniel chased, that she feared she wasn't enough. Therapy was a slow process. There were tears. There were angry words. There were moments when they both wondered if the damage was too deep to heal. But there were also moments of hope. Moments when Sarah caught Daniel's gaze and saw the man she loved, flawed, broken, but trying. Moments when Daniel reached out and touched Sarah's cheek, silent but full of love. One night, after a particularly intense session, Daniel came home late. He found Sarah sitting by the window, staring out at the rain. He sat beside her, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. "I want to try again," he said softly. "To be with you, really with you." Sarah leaned into him, tears streaming down her face. "I want that too," she whispered. But even as they promised to rebuild, the memory of that night lingered like a shadow. Sarah knew the fantasy wasn't something that could be erased. It was a part of their story now. A complicated, painful chapter. And she wasn't sure if their love would be strong enough to carry it. Daniel had left their home temporarily, taking refuge with his brother in Seattle. It was a decision neither of them wanted, but one they both needed. The silence he left behind was loud and painful, echoing in the rooms they once shared, rooms now heavy with memories and unspoken words. Sarah tried to fill the space with routine. Her work at the small bookstore downtown, early morning, runs by the river, and long evenings curled up with novels. But none of it could quiet the questions swirling in her mind. Was their love strong enough to survive this? Did she still recognize the man she had married? And more than anything, did he still recognize her? Meanwhile, Daniel wrestled with his own demons far from home. The fantasy that once felt like a secret thrill had become a source of guilt and confusion. He questioned everything: his desires, his love for Sarah, and whether he had pushed their marriage too far. Therapy became a lifeline for him. Sitting across from a counselor, he finally voiced feelings he had buried for years. Fear of losing Sarah, fear of not being enough, and the pain of feeling disconnected from the woman he loved. He realized that the fantasy wasn't just about the idea of other men. It was about his own need to feel alive and desired, to break free from the routines and expectations that had quietly wrapped around their marriage like chains. But it also made him see, with painful clarity, what mattered most. Sarah. There. Phone calls grew more frequent. At first, short and cautious. Then longer, filled with confessions and tears. One afternoon, Daniel sent Sarah a message. "Can I come home? I want to try, really try to find us again." Sarah's heart raced. The house had felt empty without him. She wanted to believe in second chances, but the wounds were still raw. When Daniel arrived, the air was thick with nervous hope. He didn't bring flowers or grand gestures. Instead, he carried a worn sketchbook, pages filled with drawings of Sarah. Not the fantasy version, just her. The woman he loved, imperfect and real. They sat together on the worn leather couch, flipping through the pages. Each sketch was a moment captured. Sarah laughing in the rain, reading by the window, sitting quietly in the garden. "I've been drawing you," Daniel said softly, "trying to remember who we are beneath all this." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what's next for us," she said honestly, "but I know I want to try." They didn't rush back into what they had lost. Instead, they took it slow. Coffee dates at the local cafe. Long walks through their neighborhood park. Late night talks where nothing was off limits. Each day was a small step toward rebuilding trust. Sometimes they stumbled. Sometimes they doubted. But slowly, they learned to listen. To really listen. Sarah realized that love wasn't just about grand romantic moments. It was about the quiet understanding. The messy, imperfect, beautiful reality of two people choosing each other again and again. And Daniel learned that fantasies might come and go, that the real treasure was the woman sitting beside him, sharing the ordinary and extraordinary moments of life. One chilly evening, as snowflakes drifted outside their window, Daniel took Sarah's hand. "I want you to know something," he said, voice steady. "No matter what happens, you're the one I want, the only one." Sarah smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. "We're not perfect," she whispered. "But maybe that's okay." Daniel nodded, pulling her close. "Maybe perfect is just the two of us, learning how to be us." Sarah Thompson had always been the kind of woman who believed that love could carry anything. She grew up in a small town outside of Calgary, Alberta, raised by a single mother who believed in soft strength, long walks, and the healing power of a warm cup of tea. From a young age, Sarah was drawn to love stories, the kind with deep, aching glances and promises whispered in kitchens over candlelight. She wanted that kind of connection, that kind of forever. When she met Daniel in Portland, Oregon, during a rainy art gallery opening nearly 8 years ago, it felt like fate. He was standing alone in front of a watercolor painting of a broken-down cabin, and she made a quiet joke about how the place looked better than her first apartment. He laughed, and in that moment she knew he was different. Daniel had soft eyes, a thoughtful soul, and a quiet confidence that made her feel safe. He was a painter, a dreamer, and the kind of man who asked about her thoughts and actually listened to the answers. They fell in love fast. The kind of fast that made people around them raise eyebrows. But Sarah didn't care. It wasn't rushed, it was right. The kind of right that made you sure, deep in your bones. Within 2 years, they were married in a cozy backyard ceremony, surrounded by close friends and a few family members. No fanfare, just love. For a while, their life felt like the beginning of one of her favorite romantic novels. Long walks through the neighborhood, late night talks under the stars, music playing softly while Daniel painted, and Sarah read in the corner. They were best friends, lovers, soulmates. Or so she thought. But something started to change in the 5th year of their marriage. Subtly, almost quietly, Daniel began acting distant at times. Not cold, just distracted. There were long silences. During dinner, eyes that drifted off even when she was telling him about her day. He started spending more time alone in his studio, often locking the door. When she asked if something was wrong, he always smiled and shook his head. "Just feeling creatively blocked," he would say. "I'm trying new things." Sarah wanted to believe him. She had always trusted him. But then, one night over wine and flickering candles, Daniel looked at her with a strange intensity. Emil looked at her with a stranger looked at her, with a strange intensity. Kind of look she hadn't seen in a while. At first, she felt excited, like maybe the old passion was returning. He leaned forward, brushing his fingers over her wrist, and spoke low and soft. "There's something I want to talk to you about." he said. Sarah tilted her head, curious. Of course. What is it? He hesitated. It's a fantasy. Something I've never shared with anyone before. She smiled gently, thinking it was sweet he still wanted to open up after all these years. Okay. You can tell me anything. He took a breath. I've always wondered what it would feel like. If we invited other men into our bedroom, not just watching. I mean, being with you. Me. Watching. You with them. The room went quiet. Sarah blinked, unsure if she heard him right. She let out a small, nervous laugh. Wait, what? You mean like sharing? Is this a joke? Daniel looked down, then back up at her. It's not a joke. It's something I've thought about for a long time. Not because I don't love you. God, no, I don't know, it's a fantasy. And I want us to explore new things together. Sarah tried to keep her face neutral, but her stomach tightened. They had always talked openly about intimacy. And over the years, they had experimented a little, different settings, playful ideas, even reading romance together. But this felt different. This felt like a step too far. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Daniel reached for her hand. It's just an idea. I'm not asking for anything now. I just wanted to be honest. She nodded slowly. Okay, thank you for being honest. They didn't talk about it again that night. She went to bed with her back turned to him. Her mind racing. She wasn't angry, just confused. Hurt, maybe. Or uncertain. The next morning, Sarah got up early, brewed coffee, and sat on the front steps in her robe, watching the grey sky slowly lighten over the trees. She felt something she hadn't felt in years. Doubt. Not just about Daniel, but about herself. Was she enough? Was she boring now? Had she missed something in their relationship? She loved him. Deeply, that hadn't changed. But the image of him, watching her with other men, made her feel like a stranger in her own marriage. Like the home they had built together was suddenly a stage, and she didn't know the script anymore. Over the next few weeks, Daniel acted normal. Too normal. He brought her flowers, made dinner, even left little notes like he used to in the early days. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. When she finally brought it up again, they were lying in bed, facing the ceiling in the dark. I've been thinking about what you said, she murmured. Daniel turned to her. You have? She nodded. I don't know how I feel about it. It's not something I ever imagined for us. It doesn't feel like us. He was quiet for a moment, I know. And I don't want to lose you over it, he said. I just thought it might bring us closer. Closer? She asked softly. Or further apart? Sarah tried to hold on to the life she once knew. After that evening when Daniel first shared his fantasy, everything felt different. The house they had built together, the place where laughter once echoed through the hallways, seemed quieter. He seemed distracted, even more so than before. His eyes often drifted, lost in thoughts she couldn't reach. But Sarah loved Daniel. She wanted to understand him. And maybe, just maybe, she thought she could learn to understand the fantasy that had entered their lives so suddenly. She wasn't sure when it changed from a whisper to a plan. But one afternoon, Daniel came home with a softness in his voice she hadn't heard in a while. Sarah, he said, standing in the doorway, I want to try it. If you're ready, if you're sure. Her heart raced. The words hung in the air, heavy and thick. Are you sure I'm ready? She asked, searching. His eyes. Daniel came closer and took her hand gently. We'll take it slow. No rush. No pressure. Just us, exploring together. Sarah looked away, swallowed the lump in her throat, and nodded. In the days leading up to the night Daniel had planned, Sarah's mind was a storm. She thought about their life. The years they had shared. The quiet mornings, the whispered promises. Wondered if she could be brave enough to say yes. When the evening finally arrived, their home was transformed. Soft music played in the background, a slow, rhythmic melody that neither of them could identify, but somehow found calming. Candles flickered in every corner, casting shadows on the walls and filling the room with a warm, golden glow. The air smelled faintly of lavender, and something sweet she couldn't place. Daniel had told her. The guests were friends of a friend. Men he trusted. They're respectful, he promised. They understand boundaries. Sarah tried to believe him. But when the doorbell rang and 4 men entered their living room, Sarah's heart nearly stopped. They were all strangers. Tall, well-dressed, polite, but strangers nonetheless. There was Michael, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes. Jacob, younger, with a nervous smile that made Sarah want to put him at ease. Thomas, with a strong jawline and a quiet confidence. And Chris, who spoke softly but had a presence that filled the room. They greeted Daniel warmly, then turned to Sarah with gentle smiles. "I'm glad to meet you," Michael said. "Daniel has told us a lot about you." Sarah smiled weakly. She wanted to be strong, to trust Daniel, but inside she felt like a fragile vase, on the edge of breaking. Daniel took her hand and led her upstairs. Where their bedroom awaited. The space felt unfamiliar, more like a set designed for a play than a home they had shared for years. The bed was draped in white silk sheets that felt cold beneath her fingers. Pillows were fluffed and arranged meticulously. The candles flickered softly around the room, casting shadows that danced on the walls. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, heart pounding. Daniel sat beside her and whispered, "I'm here." His hand found hers, squeezing gently. The 4 men remained standing at the foot of the bed, respectful and quiet. Sarah tried to steady her breathing. She wanted to believe this was just an experiment, a way for Daniel to live out a fantasy while still holding on to her. But as the night unfolded, Sarah felt more like an observer than a participant. Daniel's attention seemed divided, his eyes occasionally flickering away, watching the others. More than her. She saw something in his gaze that hurt more than words could say. Not jealousy, not possessiveness, but longing. Longing for something beyond her reach. The evening was filled with soft conversation and stolen glances. At times, Daniel laughed with the men, sharing stories and jokes she didn't quite understand. At others he held her close, whispering promises that felt like lifelines. Sarah wanted to reach out and touch him, to pull him back from wherever his mind was wandering. But each time she tried, she felt an invisible wall between them. She was still his wife, still the woman he loved, but somehow, she wasn't enough for the dream he was chasing. Hours passed. The men left with warm handshakes and quiet smiles. And Sarah stood in the empty bedroom. The candles burnt down to their bases. Silence settled between them. Daniel looked at Sarah, searching her face. "I'm sorry if this was too much," he said softly. Sarah shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "It wasn't too much," she whispered. "It was just different. I don't know if I'm ready for this." Daniel pulled her into a hug. "I love you. I never wanted to hurt you." She clung to him, trying to believe it was true.